Okay. Hi, everyone. It's not showing. No se ve. Anyway, let me introduce myself. I'm Nora Morales. I'm a teacher here at Unidad Cuajimalpa. And my presentation today is more a reflection about, I'm an information designer and I'm studying this in social sciences. So there has been a lot of thinking that I have done regarding cartography. So let me explain. My research project is about social sciences and it has to do with making tools to make easy participatory cartography. But as you can say in social sciences, they ask you to think a lot about theory. So as an information designer, I started to look for how maps came to be the way they are. And I noticed that maps have really much more stages that involve mapping. Being the last one, the contact the user with the map. So if we go to the basics or information designers, we are used to work with maps based on some rules made by geographers or people that had been using maps as documents of showing spatial information. Arthur Robinson was one of the ones that introduced a very rigorous approach of cartography. But new technologies go ahead of us. And I mean, they use maps, but it's impressive how they can change the way people perceive mapping. Like these new geomedia technologies, using social apps like Snapchat, my daughter can see in real time where are their friends in the world. So what is happening is that these new technologies are changing. They are making an epistemic break between the model of cartography of a functional communication system in favor of a more exploratory approach that favors the relations that maps create. So my interest in learning about maps, it is not about how traditional maps present stable known information, but how exploratory environments could lead to knowledge construction. So I based my work on J.B. Hartley, which was a geographer, and he started to question the representation model, and it was open more to the idea that maps can be studied as practices and relations of power and knowledge. He also challenged the cartographic assumption of maps as communication devices and the prevailing picture of transfer knowledge from a cartographer to the map user. So this question limits the way when really participatory cartography happens, that it's people making their own maps. This, we have here in Santa Fe, we have a Home Depot shop that asks people whenever they are purchasing materials to put their information there. And as you can see, it's a map that people enjoy to do, and they do it just like that. So this is a perfect environment to see how people construct maps. But if we go to cartography history, we start assuming that representation of mapping is really important, and that's how it has been taught for us information designers. We are the cartographers that have to codify this information in a map or using this map as a channel, and then decodify it to the user that will be receiving that map. But with this type of thinking, we are really doing some major principles, like there's a clear separation between the cartographer and the user, like the expert and the novice, and the map is an intermediary that communicates information to the user, to the cartographer. So it's necessary to see, or at least that's what we have told, to the cognitive and psychophysical parameters of the map users, or the abilities to comprehend and learn and interpret the map. So we are very used to user testing as the predominant paradigm. So we are the experts, and the novice is the user. And I think this relation is really who we are testing really is not the map, but our users. So this model of communication model of creating a single map, the best map, and emphasizing the presentation, also it has been involved with statistic documents, reinforces the dichotomy of this separation between the cartographer and the user. According to Harleyan agenda, we need to provide multiple presentations instead of just one map. We need to come afar from the judgment of the best who arise from our privileged position of cartographers, and we need people to explore the data of the map. So maps are really more transient created, and it can be erased many times. So I started my PhD project with it's more like power of the resistance of the maps that they are already made by the government. And we work with some towns, the original towns around Mexico City, that started to make maps, better maps for them, especially that they express their own feelings and concerns. According to Harley, we have to deconstruct the map in order to account the power relations it creates. So I based also on some work of Dennis Good and Fels, who started to look for maps as a narrative. And they were not the only ones using it. Novelists and writers were already studying the maps as a narrative, and they started. Actually, this image is from Lewis Carroll, the one of Alice in Wonderland. But the problem is Sylvia. The history of the story is one called Sylvia and Bruno, and this is the tale of two worlds linking by a map of 1:1 scale. So Harley unfortunately died before he could tell us how to deconstruct the map. But he marked 3 routes to make this investigation. One is eliciting the rules of cartography. That means that we have to know exactly what rules we took to the technical production and also involve the cultural production. Then we have to interpret mappings as social constructed text. That means that people interpret their maps, they have contradictions, they have fragmentations, and cannot be traced to a sovereign mind or subject that created it. Then we see maps as practices and relations of powers and knowledge. After these 3 paths that Harley constructed, I link it directly to what it is geographic visualization, which according to McHeren, it's an art of cognition, a human ability to develop mental representations that allow people to identify patterns and create or impose order. So if we think that the one that interprets the mapping is really the one that needs to create the map, then we can see thematic mappings, which is in here, that we are really doing that in interactive mapping. Here I'm showing you a choropleth map that show all the students that come here to UAM to study. But a choropleth map selects an area and then color that area of one solid color. And the color that is darker, it represents more people, and the other one the less. So we've made some multiple posters of the map. Here's another one. This is a symbolic map, and this shows the same information, but the circles, which are really slow, represent students that come from these areas. And then we can see this information with a dispersion map. And this information, each of one student is represented in this dot. So if we show these 3 maps in an infographic, then the reader of the map might be able to see different patterns and not just one picture. So if we follow Alberto Cairo's theory that we can create visualization to expose or to explore, he means two different things. To explore means that you only work with information you already know, but to explore, you need to have some information that you already know, and you need the reader to work with you to interpret. So I use McKiernan and Taylor, what he's called 43 cartographic cube, to explain that. First, we have the variable private and public. Then we have the level of interaction. It could be high or low. The low interaction means that the map say everything by itself, and high interaction means that the human can control the information they want to see in different phases. And then they work with reveal knowns, that means something that we already know, or explore unknowns, something that we don't know. So based on this model, you have the corner nearest to us is visualization, and the one that is far away is communication. Let me show you how it works. So here we have a map, infographic of when the Pope came to Mexico City. It was in 2016, and everyone here in the city were concerned where he's going through, and the traffic, of course, they're going to close very many cities. So if we take this infographic, we will be able to see that it was done for public use, but also it's revealed something unknown. Of course, the government knew that, but they already knew where the Pope was going to the paths that he was going to do. And then I have another visualization that you might be familiar with. It's from the Guardian newspaper. It's called 6 Years of Explosive Devices Attacks in Afghanistan. If you can see here, we have a lot of information. And on the right side, we have the different years that every circle is one of the attacks that it's already exploded. And on the right side, we can see the time where they have been the different locations between each year. And on the lower part, we can see which of these devices have been deactivated and how many civilians and victims they recreate. They also made a zoom effect in the square that it's below, and they have a zoom effect in that. So this visualization has a lot going on, and according to the cartography cube, it would be a low interaction map somehow, but it's made for some public, but not so many because they have to see many things. And after that, they want people or the reader to explore unknown information and get some ideas after that. So the exploring unknowns is in the middle. And I'm going to show you two more examples. One is this thermocolor map display designed by Camilla Hempleman. It's a piece of paper, but it's printed in thermo-sensitive ink. So when the weather is very cold, it will show only places that are covered. And when the weather is really warm, it changes the color to ink, and it will show you on the map all the outdoor activities that you could do. So it's a very clever idea, and then I'm going to show you another example. This is called Modeling the Landscape, and it's in the Science Museum of Granada, Spain. Basically, it's a sandbox, and they have a cartographic image projected above. And people start to play with their hands with the sand, and they make rivers, But also, it's a lot of information about the different heights of the level of the terrain. So actually, people are interacting physically with the map. So, sorry about that, because I just had it. So thinking about cartographic cubes again, let's see the two static traditional cartography. It's the orange ball, and then, okay, it's the 2D geographic visualizations which we make that it could be 2D and that they are interactive, like the maps we usually make, and they are animated or not, but they show many facets of the image. And then there's one visual that it's embedded in the mapping environment, and I think that's the one that we need to take attention because it's the more intuitive one, and we could use that area to certain scale and context or examples. So by doing that, we are trying to make virtual mapping the phenomenon that happens in reality and many possible representations of the work. And in this transition of mapping, could provide new understanding of maps in favor of social change and enabled with new technologies. One of the work that we're doing, we noticed that people still use static maps, but they use a lot of information in their mobile phones. So I'm concluding. I think this experiment shows that emphasizing social constructions of cartographic knowledge would be a good way to go instead of being in the system of communication of the mapping model. Also, there are a lot of questions that I finish this conference. The first one is how might political action can be enabled or retarded by the generation of information by their own citizens or knowledge of resistance groups? How can we improve access to spatial information by embedding it into the physical environment? And other aspects, of course, they have some consequences. We could have aspects regarding protection and personal privacy. We can even might end up be increasing surveillance. But I see as an opportunity to recover local knowledges from around. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. Anyone with a comment, question?
Okay. Play. Ok. Okay, good afternoon. As you've heard, my name is Wiebo Bakker. I have a special interest in pictograms, and this afternoon I'm going to take a look at the pictograms of Otto Eicher. Laying bare the bones, that gives the suggestion that I'm going to take a look at how these pictograms function, and I want to do that. I want to take a look at how they were visually developed, because there's not much known about that, and it can give us interesting ideas about the history and the place of his pictograms. So when we think of Otto Eicher, we think of a famous designer, a very good designer. But as often the case is with these famous designers, these system designers, these visual identity designers, they are not very good poster designers. Here you see a few posters that he designed in the beginning of his career in the 1950s for the Volkshochschule, the local school in Ulm. And you see a great variety of different abstract patterns. Maybe one of the courses was for a music exhibition, the other might have been for an exhibition on agriculture. So you see a great variety, but not that special actually. What we know about him, that are more these things: Olympic Games, his role as a system builder, a visual identity specialist, and then especially his pictograms. So Eicher seems to play a central role in the history of pictograms, with before him isotype as an inspiration, and then after him, yes, he's mentioned as more or less the inventor of pictograms in public space. I'm not saying that it's true, I'm just saying that you see that in many publications. Old publications, new publications, they all write about his role. Oops. So I have here a few citations. For example, Wim Janssen. In the field of design, Otto Eicher sketched the 1972 Munich Olympic Games pictograms drawn from the isotype example. Or Eskilsson. Eicher's signage proved clear and effective and set a precedent for the creation of universal symbols that are now widespread around the world. Or finally, according to the man himself, the Tokyo Olympic created the vocabulary of picture language and the Munich Olympics created the grammar. More or less, he's the alpha and omega of pictograms. But is this true? Let's take a look at the development of his pictograms. One thing that's quite peculiar, strange, is that usually only the sports symbols are being shown in history books. So that's quite strange, because the sports symbols, they're quite useless. You use them for 2 weeks for the Olympic Games and then they're gone. Why not show also the public information pictograms, the 170 other pictograms? It seems that there's an aesthetic preference for the sports symbols. But the other pictograms, the information pictograms, might be just as interesting, or perhaps even more important. Let's see. First, let's take a look at the sports signs. How were these developed? What you see here is the collaborator in designing these sports symbols with Otto Eicher, Gerhard Jox. Gerhard Jox was an illustrator, a caricaturist, a book designer who was hired by Eicher in 1968, especially with an eye on developing these symbols. Behind him you can see the sketches. This is in 1968, and he's already quite on his way. The idea was that, and that's what Eicher said to him, you should develop a sign. It shouldn't be a symbol, an illustration, like the symbols you see at the Tokyo Olympics. It should be abstract. He wanted to have a body alphabet. He had quite definite ideas about what he wanted. And Gerhard Jox, he worked on that every morning for weeks, for months. Eicher would come by, would take a look at the sketches, suggest corrections, and so over the course of 3-4 years, he developed these symbols. Eicher was especially interested in making correct symbols. They should be empirically correct. They should be based on real actions. He was proud of that. He knew that he was doing something special. He wanted to show that he was doing something special. Already in 1969, that means 3 years before the Olympic Games, he brought out a publication, an article in a famous graphic design magazine, showing how he was developing these sports symbols. He was really making a statement here. This is the photograph. See beneath the photograph my abstract sign. It is better than the signs right from there, which are respectively the one for the Tokyo Olympics and the one for the Mexico Olympics. I'm developing a real sign, not just an illustration. An alphabet, it can be the start of a new symbol language. But of course, it never goes right in one time. It's a gradual process. And looking at how he did this, it can give us some ideas about the challenges involved in developing these symbols. You see here two versions, a left version and a right version, left 1970, right 1971. And because it's quite small, it's very hard to see the differences. But what you see happening is that the symbols were slowly simplified and also some major changes were made. I'll give you one of these. What you see here is on the left side the original sprinter, on the right side the changed one. One major change that brought much more peace in these symbols was the replacement of what Eiger mockingly called the pants or the diapers of the runner. So as you can see, every symbol had one of these diapers or loincloths or underpants, and it doesn't look totally right. It's quite hard to place. If you now compare it to the right one, which is almost the same thickness as the body part, it is more abstract in nature. It is more ambiguous. It can indicate a separation, but it can also be an underpants itself. It's ambiguous. Now, although it might seem that Eiger developed this from scratch, if you take a look at the environment he was in, at Hochschule für Gestaltung in Ulm, around 1960, there was a large attention for science, for semiotics, especially Maldonado, Thomas Maldonado. He was developing semiotics for design purposes and also introducing these ideas for sign development. Most famously, the development of a new interface system for Olivetti. And the way in which he did this is very logical, very rational. What you see on the left page are symbols that indicate a certain tool. It might be a tape reader, it might be a printer. And on the right, you see small lines that indicate a state change, on or off. So with combining these symbols, you would have a small symbol language that you could use to develop a small sign system, symbol system. It is said that Eiger had an interest in semiotics. If I take a look at Eiger's work and also at what he left in the archive, it seems he also took classes from Maldonado. He was interested in his classes. He made notes of that. His own interest, he was more like a pragmatist. He was not that theoretical. Looking at these things, I think he was also inspired by this in the development of his sports symbols, especially the idea that you have a function that might be, in this case, a human being, like a machine almost, and something that indicated a state change. In this case, that might be the tool, the sport tool, and that is always indicated by the outline. Functions were always two-dimensional, black. State changes were always indicated by lines. They were always one-dimensional, which was described by Maldonado and Guy Boncheppe. So this is something very basic about Otto Eiger's symbols, besides the normal modernist grid structure thing. There's another interesting thing about his symbols, which might explain why they've become so popular, why they're so interesting to many people. You see here an image of the human dimensions with what I call the head-to-body ratio. A grown-up on the left side, an adult, might have a head-to-body ratio of 1 to 8. A 10-year-old, a head-to-body ratio of 1 to 7. A 5-year-old, 1 to 6. You can also apply this to symbols to get a better insight in what symbol designers are thinking when they design these symbols. What are the meanings of these symbols? For example, with Eiger's Olympic man. So here we have I think a ball player, and he fits exactly to the ideal image of an adult. It's an ideal image because these are usually from drawing education. They go back already to ancient times, the proportions. It might be even in ideal German. That wouldn't be, that might be a little bit dangerous to say, but he really looks like a very good German, a very athletic guy. Now, what happens if you compare this with some other examples? Here I have the geometric man, which is how he's also called, compared to the normal adult. So it matches quite well. If you compare him with a few other famous examples of symbols, here we have the DOT man from the Department of Transportation, also known as the Helvetica man. He has the proportions of a 5-year-old. That is very strange. So basically they're, Now, let's take one step further. In the beginning I referred to, isotype is said to be the inspiration for eigen symbols. Now if you take a look at the proportions, the isotype man, he's got more the proportions of a 10-year-old. So we have here a small family, and I think it's worth exploring this a little bit further, because thinking, isotype man, would there indeed be some kind of link you would be able to show, be able to prove between the isotype man and that sportsman from Munich? So I made a typology of all the toilet men. So these are all the toilet men up to 1974. So what you see are several groups. First of all, 2 examples of isotype, 1920s onwards. To the right, all the symbols designed by designers for events like Olympic Games and World Exhibitions. In the middle, 2 outliers because they have different types of arms, they're more tied to the body. This is a typology based on arm positions. And then downwards, all the puppets for public transportation. Many of our symbols were introduced by more or less anonymous public transportation organizations, and they've been very successful in setting standards. So you see here quite a clear typology. Now, of these typology, of these examples, the 3 on the top left are the most interesting because they show a very clear connection between isotype and the symbols for the events. So what is this group? Closer look. To the left we have the isotype ones, to the right that symbol is the one for the Expo 67. That's basically the first great event that used symbols after the Tokyo Olympics in 1964. And you can see that proportion-wise they're almost exactly the same. So what's important here is the body width in relation to the height of the persons. What you can also see is that there's one change that Paul Alfer, that's the designer of these symbols, that he made, and that is that he switched around the body from top to down, where first the hands slew off to the body. Now the hands are on the top of the body and the shoulders are round. Now if you take a look how this will develop further, there's quite a clear lineage. It seems that the example from Paul Alfer is very important. It was used to develop the symbols for the National Park Service in the US, also used to develop the symbols. Oops, it's stuck. Or it's slow. It's slow. Okay, then it should go back. The Port of New York, and the Port of New York is almost exactly the same as the DOT man. Now, if we take a look at the Olympics, they influenced also the DOT man. And then if we take a look at the Tokyo one or the Osaka 71 downstairs, you can make very nice evolutionary lines between all of these symbols. So what this shows is, there is a connection between isotype and a modern toilet man, which I find a great found. There you have him. Now something totally different. Traffic symbols, road symbols. Eicher didn't care about isotype. He might have heard of it from a friend. There might be a few books in his library, but he never wrote about it. It was just not interesting. He had his own things. And his thing was cars and traffic symbols. He liked cars. He was very much interested in science and traffic symbols. Now, what the interesting thing is that with the sport symbols, he was able to design a new system from scratch. Now the traffic symbols, if you want to do something with that, it poses a different challenge. You have to take into account an existing system, and that was Eicher's frustration. How can you organize, how can you improve this system? Around the same time that Maldonado and Bonjeppe were working on the interface symbols, Eicher was working on his own proposal for revising traffic symbols in Ulm. He wanted to reform traffic symbols, make them simpler, and come up with a grammar for them. And this is also the defining idea for his public information symbols. He wanted to make them more efficient, rationalize them, and get rid, for example, of all these indications for different codes to indicate that things are forbidden. You might have diagonal lines, you might have horizontal lines. This should be changed. And this is also the approach he took to making his public information symbols for the Olympic Games. Here you see an example of these. They're very diverse, which might also be the reason why designers don't like them that much, because they don't seem that well considered. Which in fact is not true. In fact, they're quite refined. What he did was he tried to take the best of existing systems. For example, the Expo 67. It shows an effort to develop a visual grammar. You see these boxes around the symbols. You can repeat these and make a certain grammar. Or the use of silhouette and line drawings at the same time, which you see in the Tokyo symbol set. Or the use of cropped objects in symbols. All of these things he integrated in his public information symbol set for the Olympic Games. So he's a very good integrator. And what you see, what he especially likes is framing things, almost like he's making photographs. He frames his symbols. He crops them to show the most important things. He's very tight in framing to maximize impact. Or, that's the other thing, he uses very effectively white space. He decenters objects. So these are things that you don't see that much. And that's an innovation. So in time, he developed all of these symbols for Urco, over 900. And it seems he lost interest because he couldn't really make his grammar to work. Just like with traffic symbols, when you have to work with existing meanings, existing symbols, you cannot really invent everything again. So in that sense, you might say it's a failed thing. He failed in developing good symbols. He did the best he could, and I think it's the best effort up to then. The sports symbols, you might see them as an artistic statement. It's an heroic effort that designers appreciate, but I believe that in fact it are these symbols that he developed for Urco, the symbols for the public information symbols, that are his best thing. I'm a little bit looking at the time. I think I'm going over time right now. 2 minutes left. Okay. Then there's probably one thing to add to this. 2 things. One, he was never able to really write what he wanted about symbols. We have this famous book from Eicher, Zeichensystemen. And initially he wanted to write his own ideas about how to develop a system, a systematic system. But he wasn't able to put it on paper. So what you have is a book mainly written by Martin Krampen, a famous semiologist. His ideas were just too vague on this. He couldn't make it work. Then finally, you have this system for ISNI. It's quite famous. It deserved an exhibition last year. There's a book about this. And what you see, and you can already see that also in his public information symbols, is an increasingly decorative tendency, illustrative tendency. What he tried to do here is more to try to catch experiences in time, rather than just a cool description of an object, using an abstract form language that, if you take a look back in his career, is already present in his posters. So what you see here is a designer who is quite limited in his visual means and has quite limited development also as a designer, but in terms of vision and thinking and construction, is just a master, I think. So I'll leave it at this for time purposes. Okay.
That was fantastic. And I'm a huge fan of the Munich program. And I think I studied with somebody who worked with him, Jürgen Hoffmann, I don't know, in Nova Scotia, a German designer who worked in Canada. I think he might have worked with Otto Leicher, maybe on that. So what are you saying? I mean, it's such a beautiful, rather Germanic idea to create a kind of scientific system. What are you saying in relation to between Eicher and, say, Tokyo? Or are they better, or just different, or more systematic? Or
No.
What's your point, like, underneath it?
Okay, discussing quality is always a difficult thing.
Yes,
eh?
yes.
I think they're better because I didn't cover it, but Eicher went out of his way to do research in making these symbols. He had a collection of the best symbols in the world he got from Martin Krampen, the symbologist, and he also used them to develop these symbols. He just put a lot of effort in this, and that's not what happened in Tokyo. That was the last minute effort that happened just in a few weeks by 20 different designers. And you can see that in the design of the system. It's much more inconsequent in terms of visual style, and it's much less coherent.
So it's the most rigorous system up to that point.
Yes, it is.
Though a case could be made that they're becoming more gestural. I mean, I haven't thought about it that hard, but if you look at symbols for the last 5 Olympics or 10, they're getting rather gestural again, aren't they?
You mean more expressive?
Yes.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Is that a bad thing or a good thing?
I don't care about that. I'm just interested in trying to figure out these developments. And in general, no, there are so many of these systems now. I'm not that interested in that. No. I think it's much more interesting to take a look at larger developments, the developments of icons, the technical drivers behind these things, rather than looking at the artistic value of individual persons.
Yeah. Oh, anyway, fascinating. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Thank you.
Is there any chance to experience your presentation of Riga somehow? Because I think somehow we are in the chapter number 2 in this presentation.
Yes.
And you miss chapter 1.
Well, there will be chapter 3, but that's for ICTVC. Okay.
What was chapter 1? Remind us.
Chapter 1 was a almost statistical analysis of what sector came up with what symbols in the first 20 years of symbol development. So, and then you see that the railways are the largest supplier of our current symbols, and that designers refine these symbols, but most of them are introduced by one, railways, and secondly, aviation. So it's more or less an analysis of how innovation in the symbol area works, rather than an aesthetic, ideological analysis. Experience now?
Later on.
Later on, okay, great.
I only can recommend you please get in touch with Vivo, because it's a fascinating world, and coming back to 5% designers before and 95 now, in that case it's the other way around. 95% already been done, and the ad zone is only 5% in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
Maybe not that radical, but it's really easy to see what's the methodology in developing, what kind of real innovational steps had been done, and when really was added something new, and as we call innovation.
Yeah.
So, thank you again very much.
Thank you,
Always
Martin,
a pleasure.
for having me here.
And please take the opportunity and get in touch with Vivo. Thank you.
Okay.
Stay here. Okay. Rodrigo.
Thank you. Before to start, I would like to ask you for a small favor. Could you pass along all these small stickers, please? 1 or 2 for each one. Can you take one and then pass to your partner? It's just a small gift. Well, thank you very much to the organizers of Vision Plus 2018. This is my 3rd time in Vision Plus, so I'm very happy to be here. 2nd time as a speaker. Today I'm showing you this design plus research project. It's called GEMIL, Icons for Emergency, and this talk is called A Language for Emergency. This is the same bad joke that I did in my last presentation, turning around the map, just to show that the north is not always the north. Just to introduce a small story to give you some context about the talk. We are now in Mexico in 2018, but I want to take you back to 2010. Remember what were you doing at that time? I was with my family in Santiago finishing our vacation, summer vacation, and at 3:34 a.m. and on 27 February 2010, a big earthquake came to shake all the central Chile area. The most affected city in the south part, it was Concepcion. An earthquake of 8.8 magnitude is the fifth most strongest earthquake even recorded. A very big area affected. Then tsunami affected the coast areas. The worst part, it was that the evacuation alarm failed. All the system not functioned at that specific time. And for the people, the recovery took a very long time, even years after this event of emergency. At that moment, with some colleagues, we started to be really concerned about the role of design, and specifically about the role of information design in this kind of critical context, critical scenarios. So we started to work on the emergency field as an extension of our academic and professional work. I would like to tell you, before to show the project, that emergency can be defined as a disruptive situation that transforms the expected course of an event. You can have a personal emergency, but there are also big emergencies that are, as the example that I showed before, can take you out of all of your planning. Both personal and collective relationships become affected, altering what is considered a normal experience. So emergency is always a disruption in the human experience, personal or collective, social or family experience. So there is a big field with a lot of projects and initiatives that are already functioning. Probably you know and you remember some of these instructions like drop, cover, hold on, run, hide. Are you prepared for 72 hours in every emergency? There are different initiatives about that, functioning from different perspectives also on the scenario of emergency. If you have in the place that you live meteorological emergencies, probably is different than having natural hazards like earthquakes. Or if you have social hazards like narcotráfico, for example, probably you have other kind of tools like Yosune showed this noon about things that you have to do, or probably you remember. But there are also international experience about this. Probably the most well-known document is this framework called the Sendai framework, elaborated by the UN, the United Nations. From Hyogo, 10 years before the Sendai framework, the change of focus, the change of paradigm is functioning, is telling you that as a government, as a social group, as a family, you as an individual have to change from reducing the impact of disasters to the management of risks. So the risk can be managed as a thing that probably you can take into your personal life, everyday life, managing the risk, more than then trying to spend a lot of money reducing the impact of disasters. So this is an important thing to remember, risk and hazards. Probably you can identify, you can be familiarized, you can learn about the risks that are around you, around your city, around your everyday life, and probably you need to become familiar also with the hazards. Probably then this is taking you to a focus more on prevention and preparedness. Here, as a contrast, you can take the everyday life language from media, that they are considering that emergency is probably one of the most used ways to sell more newspapers or to catch your attention in the news every day, telling you that every emergency situation is probably a catastrophe. And you need to change this focus, taking your own measures in order to prevent, but considering that there are some hazards that you cannot prevent. For example, you can only prepare for an earthquake, but you cannot prevent an earthquake. There are not, the science is not yet giving the answer how to prevent, for example, an earthquake. So the real change of paradigm here is that disasters finally are not natural. Disasters are things that are happening to people, but they don't have to be a natural way to deal with emergency. So preparedness and prevention are probably the most important things to remember. And in this scenario, the communication of risk or the design of information have to do something with this. What about the user background or the specific experience in this area? This is a real picture from a photographer that was in a moment where an entire city, Valparaíso, in the coast area of Chile, had to evacuate because of a tsunami. So you can see these faces, with uncertainty, not sure what are they doing, where are they going. So probably we, as information designers, we have a very big role in order to provide the right information. The projects that we are seeing here today are maybe always based in a user-centered way. So we care about people, we care about the real users. We are situated into a context in order to see, understand, and apply the right information. So information design principles and our tools are available to optimize messages even for a disruptive experience. Probably inspired by the recent talk by Wivo, we have to work more on the methodologies in order to take information design for emergency as a way to work. But here is an approach. If you take the emergency experience, you can take the moment before, during, and after. This is the moments that the models from disaster risk management are giving you. So below there are the actions, risk, hazard, identifying, being familiarized with that, learning how to deal with that. And then probably the worst moment to transfer information, to give information, is during the event, because everyone is turning into an instinctive way to work, and then recovery after the event is probably a very uncertain moment. You never know when really are you recovered from an event. So specifically, we will need probably information for identification, preparedness, procedures, learning, actions, decisions, report, articulate, and so on. There are many specific demands for every moment, but information can be a continuum inside the whole experience to support this user experience. And this is not a matter of giving you a signage or giving you a website or a mobile application in order to give you more certain responses. It's probably how could you give simple tools in order to handle, to empower people in order to prepare their own response to emergency experience. There are also technologies. There are mobile apps you can install in your mobile. For example, from public TV, this is the central image is showing you an image from Japanese TV, digital TV norm. It's interrupting every broadcasting in order to give you even with 2 minutes in advance of a moment of an earthquake or an emergency. In Chile we have this very simple project with humanitarian aid labeling in order to classify and give you some visual clues about what is inside every box that is constituting an humanitarian aid. San Francisco in California is preparing for the event that they call the Big Shake. That is probably because the time probably they have to prepare, and the way they have to prepare is giving you the tools of information for 72 hours of preparation. New Zealand in the central image, until 2011 they had no seismic or earthquake culture, and they after the Christchurch earthquake in 2011, they, as a government effort, they started to prepare every citizen for earthquakes. So they adopted the US set of 3 actions: drop, cover, and hold, as their own way to prepare. And in the right image, you have this is here is included in the exhibition of IIID awards. Is this system called First Aid Kit by a design office in Austria. It's for displaced people that is coming to live to Europe. In places like Japan, you have in 2015 they printed 15 million copies of this guide called Tokyo Bozai. The guide Tokyo Bozai is like a Yellow Pages mini guide for every house in order to know how to deal with the disaster. Then you have a very close example here, the Google Maps elaborated by Wikipolitica last year in the Mexico 2017 earthquake. Like a citizenship effort in order to give people tools of information in order to know where you can find food, water, shelter, etc. And then recently, from 2015, you have these social media applications like Facebook response platform, and they are improving and working a lot in order to transfer the social media experience into the emergency or response for a crisis scenario. And this is the part that is more involved with the project that I'm going to show now. In everyday life, as we have seen recently even, pictograms, symbols or icons constitute a global lingua franca of our time. They are everywhere. So here in this remote control that I have in order to operate this mic, I have icons also in all your information devices. This is the project. It's called GEMIL, Icons for Emergency. It's an open source icon initiative to represent risk and emergency situations. It's as I showed before, is oriented for all the moments of an emergency scenario, so before, during, and after an emergency. and is also it was awarded as a shortlist last year in the IIID awards. So why icons? Why we can transfer the emergency experience into these tiny elements? Because they are visible, because they are ubiquitous, because this is the reason that I like most. They are meaning units. You can transfer meaning units in this tiny element. They are flexible. You can put it in a printed piece, on a screen, in bigger sizes, in small sizes, and they're intended to function in all that elements. But the question remains, are they universal? If they are intended to be a common language, a global lingua franca, are they universal? So probably you will need to test that. So as you can read on the screen, there is the question that remains. We need to ask users for interpretation, and we can collect the performance evidence for every icon. So that's the task that we started to do after the first version of Gamel Icons in 2016. We started to ask people, what does represent this icon? And we did this for 72 icons of the first version. We used the indicator of meaning, so all the responses that people gave to us were taken as a valid response, and then classified in this scale. We call it Brugger-Frascara scale, with 7, or in this case 6 values: correct, almost correct, ambiguous, wrong, opposite meaning, or no response given. So from that point we started to collect all the responses. So we took the big issue, the big task of having more plus 200 answers per icon. This was a huge task. Ingenious in a naive way to work. We thought that it was probably this will take for us 3 to 4 months. We spent 14 months collecting all the responses, and the acceptance index for every icon, it was 83% minimum. So you can see there that there are icons with the poor performance, below acceptance, accepted, and then an optimal performance. On the other hand, we used the test in order to ask people about comparisons, about differences. If you can notice a difference in these elements, you can see we gave them the response. Which of these icons does represent, for example, meeting point or gathering place? So in this case, we didn't get an performance indicator in percentage. So we collect this element to associate, to compare about what people was associating with the denominated concept. In that time, in the first phase of the testing, we have collected 1,119 responses. So I'm really happy because I know that some people here was participating on that. So thank you. Personally, I can give you thanks now. And responses came from 27 countries. So we were really happy in last December collecting response, for example, from China, India, Romania. Even you can see here this Islas Canarias in the middle of Atlantic. Of course, from all the Pacific fire belt, Chile, South America, for example. The colors, the color marking is about the kind of test that every user responded. It's like an internal code for us. Yes, thank you for asking that. I'm right. 1 minute. Just to finish, we have now a platform. It's test.gml.info. You can see and check all the icons with their performance indicator there, the meaning indicator. So after that point, we started to take some measures. The first of them was improving the visual design of icons. Icons that were not able to be improved were taken out of the system, and we started to discuss also about the relevance of some icons in order to represent or not information. Well, this is a table that we did in order to show you that there is probably the most relevant thing for 1 minute left is that we have a very good area here between the 66 and 83% of acceptance in order to work. So we are working a lot now in this area that I'm moving the small hand here. Probably the icons with the best performance are here, and we have observed also that icons that you use on everyday information elements are probably performing best that icons that you are not using and you are supposing or guessing what is the meaning. In the case of differences performance, we have no surprises here. People tend to relate, to identify more elements that they recognize every day associated with the meaning. Probably the most interesting thing is here. In Chile, authorities make a difference between tsunami alert and tsunami alarm. So this is a very dangerous thing, creating specific meanings for a thing that you have to do, run. So in this case, we included this question, and we can see clearly here that there are practically no differences between alarm and alert of tsunami. Probably you need just one element to represent information here. So this is an ongoing research project, so probably if we have the chance to present, to discuss later or in other opportunity, probably I will tell you more things. Just to finish, a language for emergency has been a very good opportunity for a multicultural dialogue. Of course, there are many observations about doing the tests on Asia and Latin America or Europe and North America, so this is a very interesting thing for more specific discussion. There's an opportunity also for design and research. Here you can see my students in Hong Kong last year doing the meaning tests, and then my students in Chile, in Santiago this year doing the differences test. So we have this chance to apply the same research tool to many background people. Yeah, I'm over. Yes. Now we are working on this kind of things, trying to take the icons into different elements. We have finished this transformation of the icons into emoji elements following the OpenMoji standard created by teachers, professors from, I will pronounce this terribly, Schwabig-Mund school in Germany. Sorry for yeah, a language for emergency is also a good opportunity for collaboration or for adoption, and you maybe are probably the next partner on this. Many thanks, and sorry for the delay. Well, thank you also for the sticker. There is nothing special about that. It's just a small gift to you. Yeah, it was randomly distributed.
If you are interested in, also online at the IIID website, you can read everything or a little bit about the Greenville project, and I think it's a nice source to get acquainted and understand the whole dimension of it.
Yeah.
It's not about pictograms, that's the interesting thing. Yeah.
Exactly.
Julia?
I just have a question. Can you explain what the Bruger-Fresquera scale was? I know that's your reference to coordinate Fresquera. I'm assuming it's his work on ISO symbols.
Yeah.
Can you use that in the methodology?
with the students, with the students team, we call it as a fun way to call it, as an informal way to call it, Brugger's Frascara, because Christoph Brugger published his scale to measure icons on a book in 1999, and then Frascara took that scale from his work with ISO and published in 2011. So we had these two elements, and they worked together. I have the chance to speak in a Skype meeting with Jorge Frascara a couple of years ago, and he recommended me and give us a lot of insights in order to how to proceed with the testing, with the methodology. That's why we call it. I assume that it is a very informal way to call it, but it's the name that my students gave to the Brugger-Frascara scale to measure icons.
That one. That was really great.
Thank you.
So I actually spent the morning over at the mall because my phone was busted, and I was riding elevators, and there were some signs in there with about 16 or 20 symbols about what to do in an earthquake.
Yep.
And I thought you would probably die while you were trying to read that sign. There was another one too. There were two of them.
Yeah.
And I'm a wayfinding designer, do a lot of work in hospitals, and there's been an interesting set of symbols created for healthcare in the United States. And when we came to one hospital, we noticed that on the directional signs, every line for each destination had a symbol. So I guess I would think it might be interesting to look at, I applaud your work in the design of the symbols. So then the question is, what's the best way to use them in an emergency? Because it seemed to me that sign I saw at the mall was not, that was way too many symbols to try to absorb while you're about to die in an earthquake.
Yeah.
And likewise, so context seems to me really important, and I wonder if you've thought about phase 2 or something as to what's the maximum number of symbols people can appreciate in an earthquake and so on.
No, well, I'm afraid that still I have no response for that question, because we are working on make available these icon resources to a team that later will use them in a project. So we guess that probably a limited wayfinding system can help on that. Thank you for that example. I took many pictures yesterday in different buildings walking around here, and I think it is probably a good intention initiative, but I agree that it's not working because there's a lot of instructional elements that are not giving you the right information for the emergency moment. Thank you for the question.
Thanks, Rodrigo. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Given the global coverage of your responses, have you looked into, particularly where you have signs that are slightly uncertain, have you analysed how the responses maybe differ culturally? So where you might have a sign that's 50-50 or with a mixed response, have you analysed whether that mixed response is culturally separated, given that you've got that type of data? I mean, it'd be interesting to see how that works.
Yeah, we are working on that currently because we have a potential problem of big data now with all that elements. So we are trying to make the right connections and join people into the team in order to deal with that amount of information. But we have some patterns observed. More than the geographical location of people, we observed that the familiarization with the emergency scenarios is more important. For example, in the icons related with natural hazards like earthquakes or tsunami, all the people from Hong Kong mark it as meetings or don't know, or gave a lot of weird responses because these are not elements. And in the comments they added, because in the first part of test we added some part to make comments. Almost all of them complained about this. There are not included icons for typhoons or tornadoes, because in this set it's not included. We added in the iterated version we published in July a set of icons for fire hazards, and we are working on include new things. But to respond to your question, Phil, we have not yet analyzed that detailed elements, but we are observing some interesting things probably to show you later. Thank you.
Yes. Would there be a correspondence between existing symbol systems in the countries and how they would interpret the symbols that you've developed?
You mean
in terms of understanding the symbols, just by seeing certain things that associate with certain meanings. I know certain countries have quite well-known systems in place. How?
Yeah, well, you mean that if people are related with that emergency, they understood better?
With a specific system in their own country, might it influence their perception of?
Oh yeah, yes, of course. We have not responses from Japan. They have probably the most advanced sign standard for specifically for emergency. They have published on last July an extension of that, and we can say that we are inspired on that specific systems in order not to create new depictions or new representations of that, more than following the international practice on that.
Not only in the area of existing symbols for these specific meanings, but also other symbols that, in terms of their constituting elements, might be the same as the elements.
Yes.
I'd be very curious to.
Yeah. Well, on that case, I can tell you that, of course, but this is a thing that all research is showing you that analogical symbols are always performing better than abstract ones. So if you want to create a new language, you have to take a lot of into consideration the elements that are representing real or figurative elements from the real world. Well, thank you.
Just because you mentioned again. I recommend to you, you know that in 2020 Japan is hosting the Olympic Games. And as Keiichi Koyama, you know all of them, they are preparing enormously. So please create opportunities for yourself and your students to go to Japan and at least see what they're doing. Whether it will be innovative or not, Vibo will tell you afterwards, but at least we know what we are talking about. Good.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much. And let's have a 10 minutes break for fresh air, coffee, and the opposite, whatever you need. Thank you. Huh?
payaso lo que sea. Entonces, trabajé
¿Qué quieres?
No, para sacar mi porque
5 años aquí y trabajé mucho en Colombia y en Chile. Conozco el Tuco desde unos proyectos que hicimos conjuntos en Santiago de Chile. Y mi hija se fue a la universidad hace unos 5 años. Y por lo tanto pensé, actualmente tengo una oportunidad. No tengo que quedarme aquí en Londres, yo soy escocés. Pero viví ahí en Londres y pensamos, ok, tenemos una oportunidad para hacer algo diferente y la oficina aquí necesitaban apoyo para...
No sé. No tengo idea de qué estás haciendo, Lucy.
Tratando de sacar
Por
la...
eso, mi pensamiento era...
Ah, no, pues no sé.
Vengo aquí
No sé. Esto es una...
estuve muy contento que...
in the Zoom meeting now. You are in the Zoom meeting now.
Huh? Huh? Jupiter, 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 Jupiter. Could you stop that somehow? Houston, can you read me? Can you read me? Susan? 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 This is Mexico City calling. UC Davis.
Hello, Susan.
Hello.
No, ¿qué está?
Susan? Susan? Where's the master of the Alejandro? He has gone. Oh, went out. Susan, great. Could you text her somehow?
Well, thank you very much for your invitation, for accepting me here. It certainly is a privilege to be able to learn so much from all of you. Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I'm an industrial designer. I was not formally trained as a graphic designer. I was not trained as a graphic designer, first of all, but life has taken me through these roads, and here I am. Let's start by accepting that all things can be interpreted. Thus, everything is, in a way or any other way, a visualization. Let's assume that aesthetics is a manifestation of ethics. The photographs here are Chartres, St. Peter's, and the, how do you call it in English? The Gehike? The Gerke. I assume that there is no need to go any further in terms of the way we interpret these buildings and the way they entail the values of the cultures they were built in. What happened with me was that walking through Mexico City downtown, I found these type of figures in many, many buildings. But it was kind of intriguing. What does that thing mean? Look at this. If you walk, it takes about 45 minutes to perhaps an hour. If you walk from downtown Zócalo, which is the main plaza in Mexico City downtown, towards west and get into the Iglesia de San Juan de Dios, you'll find no less than 18 buildings with this type of scallop represented on its facade. It looks something like this. Mexico City has been overwhelmed by the scallop's presence. It's all over the place, and it has many different ways of representing it, but it's always there. In the Metropolitan Sagrary, which is the place where they have the archives, the church archives, the cathedral, La Iglesia de la Profesa, which is a church devoted to the Jesuits, San Francisco's Church, Santa Veracruz, and San Juan de Dios. It's 6 churches. 2 official buildings, the National Palace and the Town Hall. And 2 museums, formerly different kind of buildings. The Museo del Estanquillo was first a jewelry and domestic building, and the National Museum of Arts was formerly the National Ministry of Communication and Public Works. These are private buildings, houses, hotels, and they all have the presence of this scallop figure. Let me see what's going on here. There's something wrong I'm doing. How to read them. In the ground figure proportion, it's always a conspicuous figure. You barely see it as a texture. It's always a meaningful proportion in terms of ground and figure. The scale is always discrete, but it's noticeable. You cannot easily stop watching it. Its position, it's always upper center of veins and intersections. If you think of it as an icon, it's quite unlikely. There's no local reference. This type of mollusk does not grow in our seas. As a sign, for the same reason, it's quite unlikely. So I have to interpret it as a symbol. But how do I interpret it? As a symbol of St. James Apostle, of Christianity, of Virgin Mary, of baptism in general. It happens to be that St. James Apostle in Mexico is mainly represented as the whole figure because the way we accept and incorporate Santiago Apostol, St. James Apostle in the Mexican culture is through the image of him reconquering Spain, slaying Moors. Sorry? Reconquering, yes, la reconquista de España. So I cannot take that as a way to interpret it. As Christianity, in all Latin America, the figure of Christ is always dramatized, is always very heavily leaned on the suffering of the road to the crucifixion. So it's not that important. We have many of those figures. So let's take it off. If we think about the scallop representing Virgin Mary, well, Zumárraga made a great work by developing the Virgin of Guadalupe, and we have it all over, and all Mexicans are Guadalupanos, so doesn't seem to be any need to have such a symbol so conspicuously used in our buildings. So I was left with baptism. If we could look a little bit closer, forgive me for I cannot enlarge it anymore, in this representation of the baptism of Christ, what's in the hand of St. John the Baptist is an escallop, which also is quite unlikely, because escallop was not found in the Jordan River. So why is it there? So I began to go through the history of art, and I found something very funny. It was in 1460-something that Botticelli painted the birth of Venus coming out of sea, standing on a scallop shell. But funnily enough, it was only a year later that he himself painted a version of a holy conversation of Virgin Mary and the Jesus child with an apse that resembles very closely the very same figure that was the support of Venus from sea. It seems to be that it was related to what they ignored about the reproduction of this kind of species, because they thought it had no sexual intercourse. So it had this mysterious thing about parthenogenesis, that's the way I know it in Spanish. So it would explain the mystery of Virgin Mary. Yet, it wasn't that important. It seems to me it was the baptism of Jesus that what was important, because of the representation of the baptism of Jesus by means of such an scallop, based on a painting work of Botticelli and further other painters. But why is it so important? Okay, it has to do with baptism, but why is it so important that it comes about so many buildings downtown Mexico City? The only reason why I think it would be is because it was a way to protect Sephardic and more transformed into Catholics from the Holy Inquisition. It had to be discreet, but it had to be present. All through the 17th to the 19th or 20th century. What I showed you about the Museum of National Arts is a building that was finished in 1904, in the late century. If we think about information as that stimuli that has meaning in some context for its receiver, we find that when in context visualization is synthetic and intuitive. When not in context, which is what happened to me regarding this scallop figure, it provokes analysis and is intellectual, not intuitive. The answers to the postulated questions thus might be: are qualitative information practice impertinent to the practices of the visual and information design? Only when out of context. What makes a collection of data and narratives a piece of information is meaningfulness for the receiver. Where is design most needed, in quantitative or qualitative information visualization? It depends on the complexity of the information to visualize, not on its nature. The more complex, the more needed. Why is it that contemporary architecture is so meaningless when compared to the architecture of the 17th or 18th century? Wealth and power are easy to visualize with size, expensive materials, and building processes. Perhaps there is nothing more to say. Thank you very much.
Might it also be a more constructive value in the shell? Because in the pictures that you show, you see the shell often used as an alcove around a statue, or more like an inviting gesture where the statue stands on, something to guide the view of the gaze of the viewer in a list, in a frame. Might also be other meanings possible.
I agree with you, but I haven't found any other meaning. If it's only a way of addressing you to look into something particular, many other figures could have been used. Why this one, and why so obsequiously? So repeatedly.
Yeah.
I agree with you. The position in the center of the vein, well, you can do anything. Put a carcass full of arrows. You can put as in England, in London, it's full of Tudor roses. That particular position, in many veins, in London, is used in the key. How do you call it? The keystone of many buildings is the Tudor rose. It's very logical with all the Henry VIII revolution, so to speak. Why is it that the scallop is so present in that same position?
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you for listening. I hope I haven't been too boring.
I always have a question. So I'm a wayfinding designer, and I design signs often for buildings, and I would be a rich man for if I got $100 for every time an architect said that my building speaks for itself, it doesn't need signs. But it seems to me that you're onto something interesting that might be useful for contemporary architects to think about what is the qualitative meaning of their building in terms of the way people experience it. And what are we don't use shells anymore. It's kind of an old-fashioned idea. But what tools do we use to say entrance or corridor or pathway or... So there's something...
In many instances, you lose them. There are many buildings, there are many malls that you don't know where to go in.
Right, exactly. I mean, they don't speak as eloquently sometimes, I think, as the architects think. But it would be interesting if they made it a more active study about how the sort of semiotics of what they're creating and how they communicate, and then people like me won't put so many signs up.
What I would say might be dangerous, please forgive me, but if they've thought more as designers instead of architects, they might approach a semiological focus on the design problems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You are in the Zoom meeting now.
que mandar tu presentación.
Laura, could you introduce Sue a little bit? You know her better.
Let me introduce Rocio. She's Arias. She's one of our students at MADIC, and her team is Tacubaya, UAM Cuajimalpa Mobility Systems. Thank you.
Hi. Well, I'll start. Some basic information. The route from one point to another is about 12.5 kilometers. That's around 7 miles, 7.7 miles. The arrival time without traffic jams, which is unusual, is 24 minutes. With loaded traffic reaches up to 85 minutes, almost 4 times more, and that's almost 9 kilometers per hour, which is crazy because the buses go on 2.5 meters per second. We could get from one point to another running, but we won't want it. Now, these are the numbers of the potential users. According to the home destination survey of the Metropolitan Zone of Mexico Valley, the last year, the number of trips according to the day of origin or destination to the area where UAM Cuajimalpa is located are these. If we add these amounts, it gives us more than 1.5 million trips per week without counting Sundays. The analysis of this same data of Tacubaya I couldn't achieve it because the metro area is bigger and the data of the survey is not very detailed. Now, so I asked Google the time that takes a driver to get to UAM Cuajimalpa from Tacubaya and vice versa, and these are the results. I made a database where I wrote down every day of the week from 6 in the morning to 10 p.m. in half-hour intervals. We can see that the minimum arrival times are far from the maximum time. During the week, the difference can be more than the double. No user will dare to think that perhaps that day he will be lucky and he'll reach his destination in the estimated minimum time. To get to the UAM during the week, the most complicated hours are in the morning from 8 to 10. That connects with the normal office opening hours, and in the afternoon at lunchtime and after 6 of the afternoon. The journeys never last less than an hour, and if they go from end to end of the route, while in a day without traffic jams, they could take around half an hour. Now let's see the vice versa. It seems that the dynamics of UAM Cuajimalpa to Tacubaya are different. The probability that the journey lasts less than an hour is high, except on Fridays afternoons. The complicated hours are past 9 in the morning and the times in the afternoon and evening. So now let's see the ethnographic research I did. I used the AEIOU technique to have a first-hand sight of the problem. That's I use it to represent a design research under the taxonomy of activities, environment, interactions, objects, and users. I identified and record these factors through photographs or videos. Write down keywords, which are the ones that you are watching, and then make insights of the problems. So what did I observe when I watch for activities? Well, people eat in transport or the street. They have nowhere to throw their garbage. They usually go through unsafe situations and live in constant stress. Now, on the environment field, there are different rush hours on the route and several points of traffic jams. And there's too much garbage in the city. So the environment is generally hostile. There is rush, insecurity, stress, lack of attention of all of types of drivers and walkers as well. Now on interactions, there is too much ambulatory taking in the Tacubaya area. Normally the route is not completed. The drivers get down people in front of the ABC hospital. The first photo is near that place. Even when the signs of their unit says UAM. Drivers do not respect different types of rules, like the volume of the radio or music, to making full stops, wearing uniform, or answer requests for stops, respect market routes, the capacity of the units. They make stops on unsafe places, and there's sexual harassment and abuse. Users as well, or walkers, do not respect different rules, like make early stops or in safe places, the care of the units or the bus stops, the capacity of the units, and also there are sexual harassment and abuse. So it is perceived, especially during peak hours, stress, haste, and disrespect. Now the objects, there is no signage system. There is not a respect for traffic lights. Some road bumps are very tall. A big section of the route has not enough space for the bus to stop, or the bus stops. Users are in danger when waiting for the bus. There are no trash cans, neither ashtrays. There is a bad planning of the location and size of the crosswalks. Footbridges are not used. The population with visual impairment is not taken into account in the signage of the city. There are no speakers or braille system. The footbridges, buses, crosswalks, traffic routes, and several of the aforementioned objects are in poor conditions. And finally, the users. It's important to design a system to organize the interaction of the users, and this system has to take into account the characteristics, activities, and routes of the users for its planning. So I identified 4 types of users. Those who doesn't have a car, those who uses public transport even when having a car, the drivers, and the route coordinators, that's traffic officers and transport dispatchers as well. In addition to the user qualities or characteristics, the users belong in one or more ways to these groups. Some are smokers or disabled persons. Almost everybody eat on the street. Their gender, some are natives, elderly, childs, pregnant, or teenagers. Now, I identified some challenges. It's necessary to design a mobility system for the route, and as a consequence, a signage system. There is no inclusion for disabled people. There are spots without the adequate lighting. There is a lot of garbage, a lot of risk areas, at least 6 spots of traffic jams. The units and the bus stops are in poor condition, and it's required to normalize the service, the mobility system. and there is no worker or driver culture, and also the stress. So what insights I get of my research is that we need a system similar to the periférico corredor, which has rules of use for drivers and passengers, also dispatchers, and there are fixed stops and an express version, which it will be faster for the users. Another insight, this system leads to the design and implementation of the system signage, at least a basic one. And other one is that bus stops can have ashtrays and garbage cans, and attend the security with a help bottom, cameras and lighting, and attending the environment. Solar cells can be an option. Also the use of resistant materials and eye-catching, fun and meaningful design. And a good bus could be the EcoBus that has already designed spaces for people with mobility impairments, and speakers or braille could be great for the visually impaired. So what are you watching now is a map of the bus stops. I'm sorry, it is small, but the route is very large. So what was the criteria that I attempt for the location and places names? Well, I respect the toponymy of the bus stop previously established. And there were other few names, so I picked their name. And for the selection of the location, I took into account the proximity to luminaries, phone booths, road bumps, crosswalks, footbridges, landmarks, and requests for stops. For the selection of the new toponymy, I took into account the names of the streets or avenues, landmarks, and popular names of some areas. So I suggest these bus stops from Tacubaya to UAM Cuajimalpa. Sorry, I didn't say the signs in blue are the ones that are already established, and the pink ones are the ones that I suggest. Well, these are the names of the bus stops, and then from UAM Cuajimalpa to Tacubaya. Yes. Now for the signage, I suggest this color palette, blue for Tacubaya, because Tacubaya means where water is taken, so I choose blue. And orange because it's the color that represents this UAM. The preliminary pictograms are those that you are seeing, and I think I will need advice of an industrial designer to choose the materials, but I think that those that you are seeing can be used. And this is the proposal I made. I designed. These stops are designed to be placed in white places. It has solar lights, a help bottom, which is the red one, an ashtray, very, I think, curious and fun, because the ashes will be collected into the lungs. A classified trash cans that works, as well as a small table, benches, natural lights set with PET bottles, a braille system, and solar plugs, which are the green one down the lungs. This is another another design of attached bus stops. These were designed for places where there isn't a lot of space and area, and it has to be in an area near a government institution or another that allows the use of the wall. It does not have other qualities like garbage cans or luminaries, but it has important elements such as the help button and the braille system. And some complements, the totem and possible combinations. Well, I think about some ways to achieve resources too. I think borrowers can collect PET bottles from their landfills or dump sites. Big companies or universities can take care of some of the bus stops. And the design of the prototype could be accomplished in, well, here or at the Ibero, because in both universities industrial design is taught. And finally, I want to show you my inspirational projects or images. And that's all. Thank you very much.
How do you motivate to do this observational thing, and what are you planning to do with it?
Well, my motivation was and is that I'm a potential user of this system, and when I studied here it was terrible. Very terrible. Very terrible. When I studied here, I lived in Santa Fe. That's really near. And without traffic jams, I make 10 minutes in car. But I didn't want to use a car because it was really near from home. So I prefer to use the bus. But the bus makes 40 minutes or more to get to my school. So I think I wasn't the only one, and if I live near and the other ones really doesn't live near, I think they pass by stress. And well, that's the motivation, and I would like to present this proposal to maybe a borough or something like that.
Thank you.
Are there any similar projects in your country? Do we have some proof of concept? Can we see that an initiative like this has already succeeded?
I think the one that I mentioned, the Periférico Corredor, that's Copesa. And Periférico is an avenue that is a circle, and it I don't know how to say it, but it's all over the city. So you can go around the city, the peripheria, I think. That's why it's called Periférico, and I think it is useful because before it was that mobility system, there were a lot of traffic jams and really a lot of time takes the user to go to their jobs or their school or home, or I think that's a great example. I think it was the first, I don't really know it, but they were after that one, they were several more. The one that goes to Chapultepec, Valderas, Santa Fe, and other ones. Similar. Yes.
In your research you mentioned, as a design challenge, there's not a real walker or driver culture. What does that mean, there's not a real culture? They don't know how to do it, or they don't behave really well?
They don't behave. We don't behave. We don't respect the traffic lights as a walker and as a driver. And in this zone near here, there are the sidewalks were forgotten, I think, and I think too that is a place that needs sidewalks because there are a lot of students, there are a lot of office workers, and I think the planners of this area just think in people with who has a lot of money, and they often go or are transported in cars, they drive, so the sidewalks are null, I think.
You could consider integrating some kind of campaign maybe to raise awareness about the culture.
Yes, could be great.
Phil, please.
Thanks for the presentation.
Thank you.
Did you collect all the data yourself when you were talking about from 7 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night?
Yes.
How did you manage that? That's quite impressive. That is impressive in itself.
With a lot of time, and my brother helped me that time, so he drove, and my car has quemacocos sunroof, and I went with my camera photographing the
and you did that over what periods?
Sorry?
For how long? ¿Por cuánto tiempo?
That was about 2 weeks. 2 weeks, not every day. So okay. I don't know, 1 week on the morning, another one day on the morning, another day afternoon, other weekends, the nights. Yeah, that.
Well done. And did you test any of your concepts with once you developed your potential solutions? Have you tested them or explored what people think about the proposals?
Yes, I ask people that I know that what bus stop will be ideal for their needs. I get into the bus too and watch where people make the bus stop. Yes, that's what I did.
Cool. Thank you. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Last chance for the day to get in touch with Susan. Or can anyone make a Skype call? Something like this. Okay. Susan, hello? Susan? Please talk to us. Don't be shy. Can someone text her or have her on the phone, or do we have any chance of communication? Maybe. How much time we have to stay in the university? Whatever the phone number is, it's 1 minute to 6. just because you had some experiences in digital and you in the United States, what about for me as a European native, this forgetting of sidewalks, some crazy thing. Is this a American phenomenon? Is it to take the car? And there's no change in.
Susan?
Well, I think.
Yes.
Hello, Susan.
Yeah, we hear.
Susan.
Hi, Martin.
This works well. Okay, you can hear us? Susan?
Yeah, we can hear you, but we're getting a lot of echo.
Okay. The same on our side. Can we do something about the echo effect?
Close the microphone.
Okay. Here are some instructions. Susan, please.
Please ask her to activate her camera.
Okay. Susan, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you hear us?
Did you hear the comment of Raul that activate first your camera, please?
I don't think we should activate our camera because we're on a slow connection.
Okay, and could you put the presentation on screen?
Yes.
So Susan, and so that's the first slide. Right.
Did you share the screen? Oh, I have to share. Sorry. Hang on.
Oh, it works. Please touch. Okay. So a warm welcome to Susan and Zoe. Thank you for joining. And we are looking forward to your presentation, please.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Are you hearing the kind of echo that we're hearing? So greetings from California, and thank you for inviting us to present remotely. Shall I go on?
So I'm Susan Huba. I teach at the University of California, Davis, and I also do the Center for Design in the Public Interest. And I'll tell you a bit more about that in a minute. I'm here with Zoe Martin. Zoe is an undergraduate design major who co-leads the project we're talking about. Designing interactive digital map for our campus. It's interactive because it's not only tactile, but it uses embedded audio in a smartphone that you use to touch the various parts of the map for more information. To do this project, three groups joined together to apply for a success grant from our camp. Zoe and I are part of the design of interest. We worked with folks from the Student Disability Center and from our Campus Disability Issue Committee. In January, our grant was funded for $15,000, so we were off and running. We worked with students from a number of different disciplines, not only design, but from biology, international, and more. And we worked with individuals who were low vision, blind, and it was great to have such a range of participants. Because everyone had ideas about using technology in general, using assistive technology. We wanted our map to function for a lot of people in both high and low tech ways. A quick intro to the Center for Design and Public Interest. We call ourselves DIPI for short. We bring together teams of creative people from lots of different things to help solve problems through better design and hopefully to benefit the general public. Our work is all open source. And as we work on the public interest design problems, we also explore the question, what does democratic design look like? What unites us all as a team at DIPI is our overarching mission, and that is to make ordinary experiences better by redesigning everyday things. And of course, there's no shortage of everyday things that need a redesign, including our campus map. So a little bit about our campus. The University of California, or UAM Davis for short. We're located in Davis, Northern California. We're about 120 kilometers northeast of San Francisco. And very close to the capital of Sacramento. Our campus is really big. It's a kind of a city within a city. And as a visitor, one thing you would notice is that there are a lot of bicycles. In fact, the town of Davis is known for creating the very first bike lane in the United States back in the 1960s. And we're known as the bike capital of the country. Here are some demographics to give you a better sense of our campus. We're a little bit over 20 square kilometers with 88 kilometers of bike paths, over 20,000 bicycles, a population that's twice that of a small city. And that's counting students from back. We've got more than 20 residence halls where students live, 10 museums, including an art and a design one, and 13 athletic fields where sports like football, soccer, baseball, track. And like most, we have our own airport, fire department, and police. We wanted to encourage students to be involved, take ownership in this project. So we organized a group study class. We partnered with Joshua Horton, who is the technology expert at our Student Disability Center. And this is a fair that advertised class. We welcome students in any major, and the only prerequisite was having an interest in universal design and disability issues. This is a brief overview of our design. As always, it starts with learning about audience, purpose, and context for your project. So we looked at good models. We learned from published guidelines and standards. We created a lot of prototypes, a lot of graphic study, and asked for a lot of feedback along the way. We also organized a lot of data about our campus facilities in a giant spreadsheet to be able to program as part of data. We went back to historical examples. Tactile maps have been used since the 1800s, and this is an example from the Inuit off the coast of Greenland, who carved these wonderful portable driftwood maps that depicted things like islands, coastlines, and they were small enough, carried around with you inside your mittens or in a pocket. And they float. So they were really an amazing functional map that I don't think we've been able to exceed. Another example of historic tactile maps are Polynesian charts. Sailors use them to navigate islands. And as you see here, the patterns represent sea currents and stips go away. There are some bells and symbols that represent. This is a modern example that we looked at for inspiration. It's a tactile atlas. Zoom in. And this particular close-up shows the railway around Zurich. I really like how this map uses symbols and textures that are clearly different from each other and not too together. It's very graphic. Of course, there are a lot of other folks working on tactile maps, and we wanted to learn from their work. TACMap is a project developed at Lab for Living, which is in the UK at Sheffield Hallam University. It uses proprietary software to create a tactile map of building layouts for the visually impaired. After mapping out symbols using their graphic software, they're printed on reactive paper and they're heated to create the tactile surface. So far, they've mostly been using this for individual buildings. In San Francisco, we're really lucky to have an organization called The Lighthouse for the Blind and Visually Impaired. They're experts in empowering people and in all things related to blindness. They've developed a tool that creates on-demand tactile maps, street maps really, usually of one or two city blocks at a time, and they're able to generate these maps quickly and cheaply. So it's a really handy way for anyone, really, to be able to use this kind of technology. For people who are interested in creating tactile maps, the Braille Authority of North America has published guidelines and standards for tactile graphics. It's available on their website, and it's a very helpful resource. It can help answer questions like how many details can you reasonably put on a map, or how close together can the landmarks be to one another and still be understandable to someone who's using the map tactily. We also looked at maps from other college campuses. This is one, actually, you see two here from California State University, Northridge. It's an interesting example because they've taken a map that was designed for both sighted and low vision individuals on the left, and they've turned it into a map that you see on the right that's solely for blind users. So it's an example of extreme simplification, and it reminds me of the way some subway maps have been dramatically simplified. This is a tactile talking map of UC Berkeley, and it was designed by the Lighthouse in San Francisco. The way they handled the huge campus size, to break up the map into grids and print one gridded area per piece of paper, and then bind them all together into a booklet. This map uses the same smart pen technology that we'll be using on our project. On our own campus, this was our starting point, our existing campus tactile map. And you can see it doesn't use any color at all. It just has texture. It also has braille. But the braille isn't complete names of buildings. It's abbreviations based on the first three letters. So then you have to have a key in a separate booklet where you look up the information. And unfortunately, that booklet was lost by our campus many years ago. So this particular map is now rendered essentially useless. So our goal is to create visual language, tactile language, and a simplified version of our map that's easy to use for all audiences. This is what our campus looks like on the official map that's published in print and also online. It's got a fair amount of detail, including a lot of buildings that aren't necessarily visited all that often by students. And it's clear that we have to make some decisions about simplifying and editing. We chose to focus on the central core of our campus and to use prominent streets and the boundaries of our map as here. Zoe's going to take it from here and talk about the design process.
This is a thermal printer. It allowed us to do studies by rapid prototyping and gaining feedback almost instantly. The thermal printer works to make two-dimensional papers tactile. We were able to do studies of texture, size, symbols, and color utilizing. This printer requires special paper. It's called swell paper or sometimes capsule paper. It's used by tactile graphics printers like ours. The paper swells along black or dark lines and shapes when being used with a heat processor, and basically makes the black lines three-dimensional. We were able to prototype various textures. We started with grass, as our campus has a lot of green areas. We then moved on to water, and we also prototype various textures for bike paths and roads versus pedestrian walkways. We ultimately combined bike paths and roads and represented them with a single solid line and created a dotted line for pedestrian walkways. We were then able to color. We wanted to make sure our color palette accommodated the need of a colorblind audience. So we created several color palettes with high contrast. We printed them out and gained feedback. We then discovered that violet and yellow-green was the most functional and aesthetically pleasing color combination. Our group study included 2 low vision undergraduate students, and their feedback was critical in our decision process. It really allowed us to design this for their needs. Both their needs and preferences varied, so it was very nice to hear. Both their needs and preferences varied, so it was very nice to hear about design. These students helped us realize that each individual's needs differed based on their orientation and mobility skills, whether or not they read Braille, use a guide dog, prefer the help of technology, and so on and so on. After gaining feedback, we constantly refined our map to the best color palettes and layout to include our title and symbol key. We were fortunate enough to attend a design week event at the Lighthouse for the Blind and Visually Impaired, where they presented about their instant tactile map. We brought along a prototype of our map to gain feedback on. A Lighthouse information and referral specialist named Frank was able to provide his insights on our design. He praised our visual language and said it was very good, and he also advised us to increase the spacing between our dots and our walking paths to improve tactile legibility. This visit was very helpful because that was not something we were able to figure out on our own. We had to organize data for the Smart Pen audio. Our starting point was a spreadsheet from our facilities department on campus. Lots of additional data, like square footage, had to be stripped out of the spreadsheet. It wasn't very useful to us. It wasn't alphabetized, and building names didn't match official published campus maps. Some buildings weren't very important to us, like storage areas, and had to be deleted. This is the Smart Pen that we're using with our map. It's called the LiveScribe Echo Smart Pen. It provides the audio component to the map. This pen helped us simplify the information on our map. It allowed us to reduce the amount of visual information, and the pen provides classroom and department info for the building. And this was our last prototype and what we were sending to the vendor. The vendor will create a large folding version of this map and program the pen. This map will be 3D printed. Next steps. We're going to work with the vendor to fabricate our design and program the pen. Our maps will be displayed at 5 locations on our campus. We're going to test a working prototype. And we're exploring ways to personalize our map for individual students. For example, pen stickers, a pocket map, cards, or potentially printing the map on fabric. There are a lot of references available about tactile maps, but here are some that we found most helpful along the way. Thank you.
So in Sweden, thank you very much. Can you? Is there any way that you can see us? Too dark. Yeah. Okay. We can't see you. That's. Do we have? First of all, thank you very much. And never seen such a beautiful tactile map, which leads, I think, to some questions. Nora, already. Nora, please, some questions or comments to Susan, please.
Hi, I would like to know how to use the Smart Pen because it was not clear for me in the process.
Right. So we have a vendor called Touch Graphics who has some proprietary software that allows them to take information from a spreadsheet and to program that into the pen so that when you touch a building or a path or a street or an area of the map of interest, like a sports field, the pen actually talks to you. It'll say, this is Cruz Hall, home of the design department. there are three floors, something like that.
Okay, thank you.
Does that
yeah,
help?
it answers, very clever, very clever.
Thank you. Phil? Phil?
Thanks for that presentation. Just building on the question about the smart pen, is there any intention or thinking to connect the map and the interactivity to Bluetooth beacons across the university to create a connected environment that would also provide you that context-specific information?
I'm not how
okay.
what you're using. It sounds very interesting. But how would that work?
Well, if your pen's connected to the map and telling the user, how's it communicating with the user through a smartphone app or something?
No, speaker on the pen.
Okay. So if there's a speaker in the pen that's got some kind of technology on board, you can use Bluetooth beacons as point-to-point navigation. They're very low cost, and you can use them for internal and external navigation, but particularly for internal environments like in your buildings. Those beacons could add to what you've already developed with the tactile mapping. Just a thought about how you could extend it to create a connected environment.
Yeah, that's a
very interesting project. Sorry?
Would every person need a pen then, or it works without the pen?
You would need some technology because you'd have to connect to the beacon and then tell the person what's connected. So, for example, it could be through a smartphone app, or it could be through the pen if the pen has a means of interpreting the data to communicate it back to the user. A lot of blind people navigate using the preferred navigational tool is a connected smartphone app.
Right.
So just think about how you might extend the concept of what you've got with your map, which looks beautiful, to something that works within buildings on different platforms as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just one more question on the users, because on the one hand you had the blind, and on the other hand you have the visually impaired. What kind of feedback in color, shape, contrast, and other things you got on the tactile map, or was it just dedicated for the blind?
So, in our group meeting, we're actually low vision. One of the participants is losing their sight, and the other person has had low vision their entire life and can see a little bit more clearly. So along the way, as we conducted these studies, we asked them for their feedback, and we were able to get their input on the textures we chose, the colors we chose, and we're able to do everything intentionally based upon their needs, because they're students on this campus and we wanted to design it for their needs. So for example, we would develop, say, a couple of dozen textures to represent grass, the grassy areas on our campus, like our central square, our Memorial Union, and we would ask each of them to rate, which ones felt the most like grass to them, which ones did they think would communicate grass most effectively. And we did that with sort of each step of the way.
Okay. Thank you very much. One really final question, because you showed this machine tactile maps, which looks like the late 60s or 70s of last century. Is there any new technology or any market for things like that?
Oh, Martin, that's the latest and greatest. That's a $15.
Okay, sorry for that. $1,500. Okay. Good. So if there are any industrial designers, there's something to do. Yeah. Okay. Good. Susan, so thank you very much for joining us. It was a big pleasure.
Thank you.
And we hope to meet you in person again as soon as possible again. And I only can invite all the participants to get in touch with you. We will distribute your contact details for further questions and discussions. Okay?
Thank you so much.
Okay, Susan, thanks. Zoe, best regards. And see you soon again. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So, important announcement about the dinner?
Yes. We are going to go to a restaurant called HOOKA bar. And we need to come. There's a big rock in the front entrance. Like when you go to the parking lot, there's a big rock there. And the ones that have a car are going to be parked there. So everyone can, well, I don't know if we have enough cars, but that's one way to do it. And then Yosune was saying that the other part that don't have a car, they could ask Uber, and also we can meet there so we can all go together, following each other.
Which means we meet in front of the...
In the rock.
In the rock.
Well, in front of the rock.
Okay. Just for an indication, who will join for dinner? Please raise your hand. How many kilometers from here? 1.7. It doesn't matter how many kilometers. Okay, it's 1, 2, 3 kilometers, 7 minutes. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. 16,
17 with Angelica.
Okay. So we know how many buses.
Let's meet at the rock and see how many feet, and then from there ask Uber.
Okay, good. Yeah. Thanks a lot. Thanks to all of you. I hope you have enjoyed this magic afternoon. And here you see, if you get lost,
but also transportation from the hotel to the university tomorrow at 8:45, and we have places to go to Metepec, so if you want to go, you have to put your name in a list that is going to be tomorrow.
Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, enjoy, and for all those not joining us, have a nice evening and see you tomorrow again. Thank you. Thank you.
Are you going to the